Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0, episode 37. Today, we're going to be talking about which oral steroids work with HGH by Para Pharma. So, we're going to talk about, we're going to tell you guys about Para Pharma. Maybe you guys haven't heard of it out there. Really, really good brand. We're going to talk about HGH and why HGH is used in bodybuilding and how good it is with steroids and how you can just, it's an easy cycle to do HGH with oral steroids because now you don't have to be pinning a big needle into you because the HGH, you can use a tiny needle. So a lot of people like to go down that route. We're going to talk about best bulking oral steroids with HGH, best recomping oral steroids with HGH, and we're going to talk about best cutting oral steroids with HGH. And then we're going to give you some tips and advice on this podcast that you're not going to hear anywhere else from people. So let's start at Mobster. Para Pharma. So they have been around a long time, at least 12, 13 years now. And they have a long history on so many different forums, so many different bodybuilding and steroid forums out there, so many reviews. Really are a great, consistent brand. And I haven't seen a single negative review on Para Pharma all these years. They've always been good. They have a high customer retention rate, 99%, meaning when people use Para Pharma, they come back, and they come back. They keep coming back because they know that it's high quality. And especially with HGH, because HGH is highly faked. And Monster's going to talk about that in a little bit because he's been around the block. I remember back in the day, back in the late 2000s, HGH, I mean, you could not find it. If you found HGH, it was underdosed. So it was really, really hard to find legitimate HGH. So Para Pharma, now you can literally go and you can buy legit HGH from Para Pharma. And they have, it's called Paratropin. It's a kit that comes 100 IU and it's fairly priced. It's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than going to an anti-aging clinic. They also have outstanding oral steroids. Mobster and I, on the pre-show, we were kind of going over the list of oral steroids they have. They have every oral steroid that you could possibly imagine. And they have it organized on their website, so it's easy to find. It's easy to see how many milligrams. It's easy to see how much are in the pack. They don't play games. They don't try to hide that information where you order it and it gets to you and you're like, wow, this only has 25 tablets in the packet. No, they have it listed, 50 tablets, 100 tablets, whatever it happens to be. They have it listed right there on the front. So it's really, really professionally done and easy to know what you're getting, and you're getting what you order. If you order Winstrol, you're getting Winstrol. If you're getting Superdrol, you're getting Superdrol. If you're getting Anavar, you're getting Anavar, et cetera, et cetera. That's another thing that's very fishy out there with other sources is they'll sell you Anavar, what's not really Anavar. It's really T-Bol, or it's really Winstrol, or it's really D-Bol even, because they want to save money. It's all about cutting costs and saving money. And the objective is let's trick our customers into, buying something for a hell of a lot more because Anavar is an expensive oral. Well, let's trick our customers into spending 3-4 times as much on Anavar, but really let's give them something cheaper and they're not going to know the difference. So that's something that used to happen a lot back in the 2000s and then Mobster's time in the 90s and 80s. Nowadays, we got places like Para Pharma we can go that we know are legit. Mobster?
This is true, Steve. I mean, as Steve says, been around the block, and Steve's not that far behind me. And of course, our awareness of how the industry's operated in the past. So the reason why we approve of sources like ParaPharma is precisely because we've learned to rely on them. We've learned that the products are solid. I mean, I give you the sort of feedback that I've had from people, Steve, when they've used an injectable and they compare it to something that they brought from their buddy down the gym or wherever else, and they say literally day one, day two. It depends what they're taking, of course. They feel the difference. They literally know that they're on testosterone day 2, day 3, that kind of vibe, right? The decade thing Steve talks about, 12, 13 years. I think it's 13 years now, Steve, as we do this podcast. And I've mentioned this on other shows before. You want a company that's been around a long ass time. I'm old enough to know of Mexican labs that got raised. I'm old enough to know of companies that have lasted not even 12 months, Steve. You know, great product, and then by the end of the 12 months, the product was rubbish, and then they completely disappeared off the radar. They've taken their money and they've run. Steve talks about, you know, infers products not being up to scratch when it comes to, you know, it should be Anavar and it's something else completely. I've seen how this stuff's marketed on some of the Chinese websites, Steve, and literally it's a generic photograph of a white powder. So ultimately, you want companies that are producing solid product. Now, when it comes to, and as Steve said this at the beginning, growth hormone, it was massively fake back in the day. The price has actually gone down, Steve, compared to what it used to cost. Now, obviously, prices vary, so I'm not going to make a statement about the price right now. But it used to be a lot, I'm going to say nearly 3 times more expensive back in the day, right? And that's on a like-for-like basis, allowing for inflation, deflation, whatever you like, Steve. Literally 3 times the price. And of course, at that price, the temptation to give you something that wasn't growth hormone was enormous, right? And then when you even start to get into pro levels, we're going to touch upon what would be a sensible dose for our listeners versus what the pros do for competing later on in the show. But when you start to get into those kind of numbers, Steve, it starts to sound like tens of thousands of dollars for a high level Olympia competing, high level competition stack. It could easily be back in the day crazy money. And trust me on this, you didn't, even if the lab was legit, Steve, they didn't know what they were getting from their raw suppliers. And then there was pains in the ass with testing and all the rest of it. So it got absolutely crazy. So of course now we approve sources that we've tried, we've tested. We've literally, Steve and I, personally used ParaPharma products. So we can turn around and say, hand on heart, I've tried this X, I've tried Y, and this is how I felt. This is what happened when I was on the stack. So I can 100% say that. Steve can say that. A lot of our listeners that listen to this on a regular basis can say that. So this is the sort of stuff that with the feedback that we want. Like Steve says, now we have a family of forums that we work with, but there's many, many forums out there. And again, feedback across the spectrum, Steve's been absolutely amazing. So it's solid product that's been around a long ass time, which means you've learned to rely on it, that you know is the right kind of dosage, and you know you're going to get the right kind of work from. Now, of course, we're going to talk about training and diet and all the rest of it to get the absolute best out of any of the stacks that we're going to talk about today. So guys, you still got to put the work in, but as far as the product's concerned, ParaPharma has your back, Steve.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about HGH a little bit and kind of review. We've talked a lot about HGH in the past on podcasts, but I feel like it's really, really smart to review it because a lot of people are still confused about HGH, Mobster. So HGH, you got to remember, it's found in our body. Now, as we age, HGH starts dropping. And the thing is with our, Western diets and our lifestyles that have been adopted now all over the world, whether you're in Asia, Middle East, even Africa in some cases, they've adopted the Western diet of eat what you want when you want. And the problem with that is the more you eat, the more you become insulin resistant, the lower your HGH drops. So that's a problem. And that's just something that we have to deal with. So our HGH is dropping more rapidly and more as we get younger, as time goes on. Although I feel like our diets are kind of changing now, they're kind of improving back, especially as the boomer generation starts dying off. But notwithstanding, we definitely have an HGH issue. And if your HGH is not good, you're going to have a harder time sleeping. You're going to have a harder time with recovery. You're going to have a harder time repairing. You're going to have a harder time building lean muscle mass. You're going to have a harder time cutting fat. So using exogenous HGH works beautifully because now you can inject the HGH. The ParaPharma HGH comes in a kit. So you're going to get the kit, then you're going to reconstitute the powder very, very carefully. Make sure you keep it in the fridge. So the paratropin is going to come, and then you're basically going to mix up a vial of it and then leave the other vials in the fridge unmixed. And then you're going to go through that first vial. And then when it's done, you'll mix the next vial and so on until you're done with all 10 of your vials. So The product pack comes 10 vials and 10 IUs per vial. So you're getting quite a bit. It should last you a while depending on how much you use. Now, with HGH, what you want to do is you want to pin it with an insulin needle. Now, you can use a bigger needle if you want, but a slim pin, very, very simple to use, a 29 gauge or a 31 gauge. And then you just pin it into, you alternate your stomach body fat, and you alternate it back and forth. You can inject it in your shoulders. You can inject it really anywhere, but a lot of people like to pull up the belly fat and inject it. It's not going to help you burn the belly fat by doing that, but it's just an easier spot to inject, and it's basically painless. So if you hate injecting, this is the advantage of this cycle that we're going to get into, where we're going to stack orals with the HGH. Now, HGH does so many good things in our body. Now, all that stuff I was telling you guys about, when it comes to what we're missing out on, everything from sleep, metabolism, fat loss, better skin, better immune system, better libido, more energy, all that stuff, even boosting, helping your cholesterol levels, recovering your endurance and your performance in the gym, all this stuff is going to happen when you're using HGH. So it's kind of like tapping into the fountain of youth, Mobster, you know, when it comes to this.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here, Steve. Absolutely. Something that I mentioned to Steve in the pre-show was the amount of longevity, quote unquote, lifestyle type clinics, where in addition to TIC, we're now starting to see more with just the TRC side of things, Steve, more likely to also prescribe growth hormone, but specifically the anti-aging side. I'm also looking here, Steve, at an article that we're referring to as we do this show, in the medical uses. And the medical uses, the obvious one was kids that were under height. They would have, they're not dwarfs or midgets, Steve, but just real short for their age. And we started to see, again, this 20, 30 years ago, kids like that would be given low dose growth hormone and just to increase their height up to normal height. You're also looking at, and funny enough, Steve, this is actually a little bit of research that I did some time ago, and I've mentioned this on other shows when we've referred to growth hormone, where HIV patients would sell the spare that they'd been prescribed. And this is how bodybuilders was able to obtain solid product. Now, as a side story, and I've mentioned this before, and it's actually an additional benefit here, Steve, I've got two buddies, and I've mentioned this on other shows, that have specific medical conditions. One's got Crohn's and one's got colitis. And essentially, it's the immune system attacking part of their lower intestines. And it makes it really bad for them in terms of digestion. They're in the toilet multiple times per day, 20, 30 times is not unusual when they've got full-blown issues. And for both of those people, more or less asking me at the same time, I went away and did a little bit of research, and I found an HIV forum where the amount of money that the guys were spending per day was talked about, the dosage was talked about, but specifically in this particular two cases, the benefits for both of them here in the UK to be using growth hormone and allow that lower intestine, that gut, to be repaired. Now, the issue here in the UK, Steve, you know that we've got a National Health Service, and getting them to prescribe what was the equivalent at that time, the $500 a month for a prescription versus the 20 or 30 pounds, that's kind of typical, even with subsidized and so on and so forth, was very, very difficult. So what these guys would end up having to do is go into the black market using a company like Para Pharma and essentially having to self-prescribe. And then, of course, the benefits. Again, it's just one of those, have you got the disposable income in their particular case? But these are the kind of benefits that it's surprising how this stuff works. You can have great skin, the anti-aging. You and I are going to talk about a little bit with the injury repair, soft tissue injury repair, ligaments and so on that we get sometimes in bodybuilding, but obviously also the anabolic, the muscle boosting. But these other benefits, like I said, HIV patients retaining muscle tissue so they don't waste away, and of course, boosting the immune system so that they don't have that particular issue where the body's attacking itself. And in my two buddies' case, literally almost transforming how they feel, Steve. When you're, as we would say, to put it crudely, in the shitter 30 fucking times a day, food just passes right through you. You feel like warmed up death. And growth hormone, paratropin specifically from Para Pharma, in this particular case, Steve, would be life-altering. Their sense of well-being would be absolutely amazing. So the benefits are crazy in terms of just overall benefits. But we're specifically talking about here, guys, your muscle boosting, muscle retaining, fat loss benefits that you're going to get in the gym. Back to you, Steve.
And at the end of the day, when it comes to dosing HGH, listen, the side effects are going to happen the more you run it. But if you run it at a lower dose and you run it at a correct dose, you shouldn't have side effects. But let's say you abused it, and with this ParaPharma HGH, let me tell you something. 1 IU, 1.5 IUs, 2 IUs a day is really all you need if you're looking, to run it in a stack with oral steroids. But if you're looking to, compete, or you're looking to really, really take things to the next level, then obviously you're going to run it at a higher dose. So we're going to get into dosing shortly. But side effects, look, if you run it too high, if you're running it like 4 IUs, you want to see what happens, even 3 IUs. This high quality HGH is more likely to give you side effects even at 3 IUs than a inferior HGH you're running at 6 IUs. I remember back in the day, we'd get HGH from like China and stuff, and it'd be under market HGH, and it'd be so underdosed, you'd have to run 6, 7 IUs just to see anything from it, and you wouldn't even start getting side effects until you started running at 6, 7 IUs. Now with ParaPharma, you run the ParaPharma 3 IUs a day, there's a good chance you're going to start getting some of these side effects. One of the big ones, hypoglycemia, that's really common in HGH. You just get so hungry on it. It's like your body wants carbs when you're on it. Achy feeling when waking up, sometimes pains in the joints, water retention, carpal tunnel. That's a really common one. And then being too tired. You'll start noticing on the HGH when you're on it after a couple of weeks, you'll sleep really, really hard. But if you're a type of person who gets tired during the day, you just have that issue, it could make you more tired in the day and be annoying. But if you're running it at a good dose, none of these side effects are going to happen. I've run HGH at a correct dose. I didn't have to deal with any of these side effects. None of them. I just had good results on it. Good clean muscle mass, better recovery. And I also was dropping body fat, even though my diet did not even change. So HGH is really it's the best anti-aging thing you could take, and it's non-anabolic steroids. It is a peptide, and it's naturally found in the body. So I mean, yeah, it's really good. So Mobster touched on that a bit, and then we're going to get into stacking it. And then why don't you start getting into bulking oral steroids with HGH and dosing?
Yeah, so listen, guys, again, doing the research for my 2 particular buddies at the time was a great way for me to learn about the benefits, the minuses, the pluses, whatever you like to call it, of growth hormone. And again, that went on to said the HIV forums, the AIDS forums, but also onto bodybuilding forums, and when they had to look. So a great indicator, perversely, Steve, it's actually a good indicator that what you're using is legit. Again, like ParaPharma, was perversely the carpal tunnel. Now, very, very quickly, guys, growth hormone can and will, especially if it's dosed incorrectly, you need to pick the right dose for what you're doing, and that's the sort of advice we're giving you today, will affect, in this particular case, the sheaths, the fibrous tendons that are around the other tendons that are literally, I'd describe it's like something out of the Terminator movie, Steve, where you see him peel back the flesh on his arm and you see those cables going up and down as the metal hand flexes. So in carpal tunnel, it's a band of fibrous tendons around the wrist and inside are tiny little sheaths, and the tendons go backwards and forwards for those sheaths. With excessive growth hormone, both the tendons and the sheaths thicken up. Now, in carpal tunnel, which you can get without using growth hormone, it's literally like typer's wrist or whatever you want to call it for repetitive stress. And what's happened, of course, is that the tendons thickened and it's rubbing against the side of the sheath. With growth hormone use, it's actually a great indicator. So what did I do, Steve? I looked at the dosage and I said, if I saw this dosage, I saw carpal tunnel. If I didn't see this dosage, or I saw less, I didn't see carpal tunnel. So for me, and I've said this a million times, Steve and I can dispute a little bit either way, but it's always going to be towards the lower end. Every single time I saw users exceeding the equivalent of 2.5 IUs per day, that's, you can do it every other day with 5 IUs, that's when I was more likely to see the side effect of carpal tunnel. And in a way, of course, the moment they exceed that, the moment they get the issue, they can back off and find that sweet spot for them. Now, if you are a professional bodybuilder, you're probably going to be on a lot higher dosage, but I would argue this, Steve, for a much shorter period of time. So you can use low dosage for a very long time. And in fact, when it comes to growth hormone, we're going to talk about how long you might want to be on, not necessarily with the oral cycles, but whether you're using growth hormone off an oral cycle. But equally, for me, a pro bodybuilder is going to be using high dosages, but for short periods of time, literally that run up to the competition. So that's one particular issue. I also want to throw something else out there, Stephen, and I'm going to talk about the first one, which would be bulking. Is the argument I've seen, and I've got to say that I dispute this, and again, it's referring to the article that we're using as a reference today, the argument about quote-unquote organ growth. Now, the great example of this, they literally named the muscular, ripped, bulging belly after him, was Dave Palumbo with the phrase Palumboism. Now, I've used this argument, right? So Dave is still a huge fan of using growth hormone and has written and talked about this multiple times. And when he was on stage at 300 pounds, looking like an absolute fucking freak, his stomach was sticking out. He had a proper six-pack, Steve, covered in veins, but it stuck out like a Ninja Turtle. He's now a retired bodybuilder and his stomach doesn't stick out. So the idea that growth hormone encourage organ growth would be arguably permanent. And yet, of course, we haven't seen that. So I suspect it's an on-cycle during that bodybuilding, especially competitive bodybuilding phase. He would not have had his organs shrunk medically afterwards, guys. So I'm going to argue that particular point. Right, let's choose one now, Steve. And I'm going to go with a bulking cycle. And again, my dosage for growth hormone, as I've already said, will be the equivalent of 2.5 IUs a day. In fact, I'm probably going to use that dose throughout here, Steve. But straightforward, very, very simple, Steve. I'm going to choose D-Bolt because absolutely I know what happens when I'm using it. I know how effective it is in terms of my strength, even the amount of muscular gains I might be able to retain with that little bit of water that D-Bolt might give me on cycle, so on and so forth. So for me, Steve, I've never run it higher than 50. And my absolute best has always been around 30 milligrams per day. That's 310 ml tablets. You can get those from Para Pharma as well. And that would be it, Steve. Honestly, I'd run it real simple. There are other things you can do, and there's obviously we could go down the injectable route, but that would be it. Absolutely, as a simple, straightforward, super duper, no problems, nothing to complicate to think about, guys. Get the diet right, get the training right. 30 milligrams of D-Bolt, Steve, and 2.5 IUs, or the equivalent of 2.5 IUs of growth hormone. Now, what I would tweak, and I said this already, is that I would run the D-Bolt probably no more than 8 weeks, but I would probably run the growth hormone longer. What do you think on that, Stephen? Would you have a different choice?
Yeah, and we, in the last section, we didn't really discuss it, but yeah, HGH, you really want to run HGH longer than 8 weeks. But the misconception, though, is you can't get good results on HGH in 2 months, and that's just not true. I run it, and I run it for a couple months, 2-3 months, and I've gotten good results on it. Now, is it going to be something where, you're really going to see great results where it's going to like change your physique and everything? No, because when I ran it, I was already in good shape and everything. It was kind of more of an icing on a cake thing. So you have to kind of treat HGH that way. So you might want to stay on it longer. So you could actually start your HGH before you start your oral steroid. And then during your HGH run, you can throw in the oral steroid. Now, the good thing about HGH is it's not going to suppress your HBTA. It's a pulse. So when you take it, it gives you a pulse of HGH. So you don't have to worry about cycling it on, cycling off. You can literally just stay on HGH for months and you don't have to worry, as long as it's not an excessive dose. Now, if you stay on months on an excessive dose, that's going to cause problems. And that's going to cause these issues that I talked about in the last segment with side effects, for sure. So you want to stay on a normal dose. And the idea is you're producing HGH already, right? You're producing pulses of HGH. But when the HGH in your body drops, that's where the exogenous HGH comes in. So that's why taking HGH before your meal, because after you eat, that's when your HGH drops, your insulin goes up, your HGH drop, they run inverted. So You want to, that's the trick with HGH. You take it before a meal, and that's going to make it more effective, because now you're not only getting your HGH all night while you're fasting, because the longer you fast, the more your HGH goes up. Okay. So let's say I fast till noon. Okay. And I ate last night at 7 p.m. My HGH at 10 to 12 hours will start rising. Okay, if you haven't eaten anything for 10, 12 hours, it's going to start rising. So my HGH is rising the next day, all morning, into my first meal. As soon as you eat your first meal, boom, now your HGH drops. Okay, because your insulin goes up. So the idea is you take the HGH before your first meal, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock, 12, 2 p.m., whatever. You take the HGH about 30 minutes before your first meal, because when your HGH drops, you want the HGH in your system still giving you a pulse. So, and don't make this too complicated. Don't be like, well, I got to keep my HGH elevated 24/7. You don't. It's about getting more HGH pulses. You're working with your body and with the HGH. Now, if you're an older guy like Mobster's age, you're not producing much HGH anyway. So you see some of these guys, on YouTube or whatever, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter when you take HGH, that's just growth science. Well, to them, it doesn't matter, because they're in their 50s and 60s and they've already blown out their HGH anyway. They're not producing it because they have poor lifestyles and they've abused steroids for years and they have poor organ health. So they're not going to produce, and they eat every 2 hours. So yeah, you're not going to produce HGH if you eat every 2 hours, okay? But like for most of you out there listening to this, you're not in that case. So you're going to be able to get more benefits from HGH and get more bang for your buck by taking it like that. All right. So that's that pretty much explains it. So the next one we're going to talk about is Anadrol. And Anadrol is also really good for bulking. It's my favorite bulking oral. And the reason it's my favorite bulking oral is Anadrol is a DHT derivative, but it also has estrogen properties, where it binds to estrogen in the body. So you may get some water retention with it, but it's going to harden you up. So it's a DHT derivative that hardens you up and gives you some bulking properties, but it's really good for bulking. It makes your muscles big and hard. It's really weird. And the way it's structured is fascinating, the way they structured it. Because a lot of people, they've used Anadrol before and they don't believe it's a DHT derivative. They're like, oh, DHT derivative is supposed to dry me out. But it's weird. It kind of does that, but it does it in a different way than some of the other steroids we're going to talk about for recomping and for cutting that don't have any water tendency. So, Mobster touched on the Debo. Definitely Debo aromatizes like crazy. And then you're going to have Anadrol. But what they both do as well is they boost appetite. And Anadrol will boost your appetite as well. And that's going to help you. So make sure you're eating good, clean, nutritious food, and make sure that you're, working out and getting in good workouts. And Anadrol, typically 50 milligrams, are called A-bombs. Usually people just do 50 milligrams. They might do 25 milligrams. I like to do 25 milligrams. I like to go, on the more lower side with my dosing. But some of you will react really well to 50 milligrams. So play around with those doses, 4 weeks, and then make sure you're running your HGH on a daily basis along with the Anadrol, and you'll have some really good bulking benefits. And again, with this one, I would start the HGH a little earlier than I would, and then use the Anadrol to kind of boost things along. And then you'll have some really, really good results. Your recovery will be great. It'll be fantastic. It'll be a hell of a cycle for bulking. So you do 4 or 5 weeks with Anadrol. I wouldn't go longer, because it's a really, really potent steroid and has a lot of harsh effects. So Mobster, do you want to touch on, you want to go with recomping, your favorite recomping stack?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably use something like Anavar here, Steve. It's because I'm super familiar with it and I know what happens to my body when I'm using it. ParaPharma does an Anavar 10 and an Anavar 50, Steve. What would I do? I mean, again, super, super simple. We talked about this multiple times. The most effective dose for pretty much every listener listening is going to be 50 milligrams. Why? Listen, why? You get strong on Anavar. That's the number one reason why I'll use it. It just seems to improve my strength. It seems to improve my power. And I don't gain loads and loads, right? So when we're talking about recomposition, if it was an injectable, Steve, I'd be talking about probably trend. But when it comes to recomposition, I want that combination of fat loss, which growth hormone from ParaPharma can assist us with, but obviously the Anavar. So what happens for me on Anavar when I'm running it solo is I gain at the most, Steve, around 5 pounds, and it's all functional tissue. I don't get bloated. I don't have any water retention, which is precisely why we use an Anavar. I get strong in the gym, which was exactly the reason for me using it. And if I was wanting to keep those gains, and I was at that point in my training, that would be perfect for me, Steve. And then in combination, and something I just said to Steve in the pre-show off air, was the synergistic effects, right? Now, something when it comes to all steroid and or growth hormone stacks, whether it's injectable or oral, and there's a certain mythology here. Maybe there's even an argument for bro science, but I think it's been proven again and again and again, Steve. The synergistic effects of running steroids with growth hormone is almost more than what happens when you use them individually. So you get that effect of the two things together gives you another plus over and above. If it was 5 for VAR and 5 for growth hormone, you get 11 from running the two together. Because, for example, Steve, again, if I was trying to boost my power, which is what I would normally do with Anavar, the risk of injury becomes higher, and growth hormones assist me with recovering from injuries and the stress on my tendons. But for recomposition, Steve, I think it's one of the best cycles you could possibly do if it was an oral and growth hormone run together, simply because I'm not gaining loads and loads of tissue. Obviously, my diet needs to be on point, my training needs to be on point, but the ability for the growth hormone to lower body fat levels, which is one aspect, and at the same time add muscle tissue, which growth hormone does, as well as the Anavar, makes it, from in my mind, Steve, a perfect recomposition stack. What about you? What about on that one? And would you have a different choice?
So what would be your dosage on the Anavar and the length again, so that the listeners understand?
Sorry, listeners. So yeah, I mean, 100%, 50 milligrams a day seems to be the sweet spot. Every single Anavar stack we've ever talked about. Now you can run it lower, and certainly if you was running it in combination with other products, I would 100% want to look at what else you were doing. But we're talking about a simple Anavar and growth hormone stack. So it would be 50 milligrams of Anavar per day. And again, my sweet spot would be 2.5 IUs per day. What about in terms of the cycle length, Steve? Again, 6 to 8 weeks. Recomposition, there's an argument to be made towards the 8 weeks only because I want my gains and, for that matter, my losses to stick. And I would prefer for change just to stay, i.e. the fat loss to stay off and for the muscle loss to be retained. I'd like you to run it a little bit longer. So we're pushing out towards the 8 weeks. Typically, we don't like to run orals too long, but I'm pushing out towards the 8 weeks for that specific reason, Steve. I want the fat loss to remain lost, and I want the muscle gains and the power to remain in situ as long as possible. Now, of course, guys, and I've touched on this before, the tweaks that you make afterwards in order keeping fat off and keeping muscle on come from the diet and training as well. But we're doing these two in combination to assist you with your recomposition. Back to you, Steve.
So let's get to the next one. That's really good for recomping, and Superdrol. And ParaPharma has a Superdrol. It's 10 milligram a tab, 100 tablets in the pack. And Superdrol, strength. It's definitely a strength oral. You're going to have a lot of strength on it, but it's also good for recomp because it doesn't aromatize into estrogen. So you can run the Superdrol anywhere from 10 up to 30 milligrams a day. I wouldn't go more. It's really nasty, the side effects, once you exceed 30 milligrams. When I ran it, I was running 30 milligrams a day, and I throw in an extra 10 milligram on my workout day just to give me a little psychological boost before my workout. But the side effects are brutal. So then I had to drop it down to 10 milligrams. I can only go with Superdrol about 3 weeks. So 3 to 4 weeks would be my maximum amount of time on it. But Superdrol, look, at the end of the day, it can transform your body in 3 to 4 weeks. So recomping is about transforming the body, right? So if you want to transform the body with an oral and you want to do it quick, then Superdrol is one to consider, but it's so damn toxic. It's so toxic. So when you're on it, it's normal to feel that toxicity, that lack of energy, and it just is really rough on your organs. So be careful with this one. It's not something for a newbie if you want to recomp, but it's something to consider just trying out and trying it. And it can give you some really, really amazing changes to your physique in just 2 or 3 weeks, really. So it makes a really good recomper. And the thing about it too that makes a good recomper, Mobster, is it doesn't make you hungry. It kills your appetite because your body is so fucking toxic on it, that your body is so sick and toxic when you're on this stuff that you don't want to eat. So it's just like if you've ever had it's just like if you've ever had COVID or the flu or something, you don't feel hunger because your body is like, don't feed me. Your body is like, stop giving me food. I'm trying to fight this virus, this horrible virus that I have. I'm trying to, you get a fever and you just feel like crap on it. So you don't have an appetite. That's how Superdrol makes you feel. It pretty much just makes you feel like you have some type of viral infection, so you don't eat on it. And that's great when it comes to recomping, but it's also packing on the muscle and the strength at the same time. So if you really want something quick and you don't have patience and you have some steroids under your belt, and you want a recomp, ParaPharma Superdrol, it might be one to try. But
I'm just thinking it be one of those things what I might need to get in shape real quick. And some of our listeners, Steve, might be models or doing a photo shoot or have a surprise holiday coming up or something like that. Do you know what, Steve? The only issue, and I'm thinking historically here, with Superdrol for me is that, of course, it was part of the whole pro hormone debacle 10, 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago now. And people were able to go into supplement shops and buy this stuff over the counter. And the reality was, as with a lot of pro hormones, but especially with Superdrol, because they could buy them over the counter, they did not treat them as steroids. And they were literally taking these and then going the whole, well, I can take more because it's over the counter. No, motherfuckers, it was a steroid. It just got through the loopholes. And that's the only issue. You need to treat Superdrol with respect, and you need to think it is a steroid. That's it. If you think it's a steroid, if you think it's an oral steroid, and you treat it with the way it's supposed to be treated, then you obviously, like with any other fucking steroid that we talk about, Steve, we try to give you the best advice, the safest cycles, and so on and so forth, in our opinion, naturally. And that would include Superdrol. So treat it with respect, and it can be incredibly effective. But it ain't a pro hormone, motherfuckers. It wasn't a pro hormone the first time around, and it's definitely not a pro hormone. That's precisely why ParaPharma sell it, because it works, but it's an anabolic steroid and to be treated as such. So you do all the organ protection, you would make sure not to overdose it. And like Steve says, if you treat it as a potent oral steroid, you run it for short periods of time, as and when required. Steve, back to you.
So I'm going to take it a completely different direction and go a 180 route. Proviron. And Proviron is the opposite. Proviron, you're not going to see much from Proviron except some hardening and some cutting to your muscles and stuff like that. But Proviron is a straight DHT derivative. It's got very little to no side effects. Hell, it might not even be classified completely as an anabolic steroid. It might be classified just as a drug, because in some cases, it doesn't even suppress you. So it's complete opposite of Superdrol. You won't even feel that you're on it in some cases, but you'll get some benefits, maybe a little bit of pumps when you're at the gym, maybe a little bit of recovery and that sort of thing. You're going to notice libido increases, and it binds to SHBG in the body. So you can stack it with the HGH, really, really a very mild stack. And this is for people who just want to, you want to just focus on the HGH, and you maybe want to just throw something in there just to give you a little more hardening benefits without any side effects. So Proviron would be a good option, 25 to 50 milligrams on the Proviron. And really, you can run the Proviron 8 weeks. I mean, because Proviron is one of those orals. It's not liver toxic. It's not 17 alpha alkylated. Now, is it going to hit your liver and is it going to hit your kidneys a little bit? Yes, it's a drug and you're using it at 10, 15 times therapeutic dosing. So it's going to have some effect on your organs. It may have some effect on your heart even, your heart health with cholesterol, but it's nothing like Superdrol. 10 milligrams of Superdrol will mess up your kidneys, liver, and heart way more than running 50 or even 75 milligrams of Proviron. So Proviron is a very quote unquote weak oral steroid, but ParaPharma has an excellent Proviron. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do Proviron with HGH, but it is an option if you're looking for something very mild. A better way to run the Proviron would be to throw it in to one of these other stacks. So you could throw in 25 milligrams of Proviron in one of these other stacks. You would get far more production out of your cycle, far more value out of your cycle. But like I said, you can do it this way. Just do the HGH and then throw in the Proviron as an oral if you want to do something really, really mild. So it is possible. So Mobster, get into our cutting stacks.
Yeah, I'm going to make a little bit of an odd choice here when I'm going to talk about Turinabol, Steve. We recently did a podcast on Turinabol, and we talked about the whole creation, the way that it actually boosts some of your athletic ability, and so on and so forth. So why would that make it great for a cutting stack? Well, quite simply, you're going to be able certain drugs, Superdrol, Anadrol, and Anavar, even, Steve. I wouldn't want to do my cardio on any of those orals. I just wouldn't. Some of them I might just be able to manage to do some cardio on. I can get a pump walking to the gym, Steve, on the Dynabol. Never mind going for a jog or trying to run around some fields or something like that to burn fat. So I don't want a drug that's going to impact me when I'm trying to do cardio as a way of losing weight, cutting fat, whether that's pedaling the bike in the gym, running around the local fields, walking up the mountain, Steve, whatever else. And Turinabol was specifically developed to assist athletic ability in the East German athletes that it was created for. So what does that mean? It means that they had the power to move things like the discus and the shot put and whatever else, but it also meant that some of the lower distance stuff, the 100, not so much the 100 meters of sprinting, but the 200, 400, 800 meter athletes might have been losing it as well. So it wasn't completely killing your cardio. Some will absolutely destroy it. Steve's touched on this on other shows. So I want the ability to do cardio, which is going to assist me with cutting. Not only that, Turinabol is a little bit like Anavar, that you don't gain loads of muscle mass. Again, I would probably be thinking on a Turinabol cycle, Steve. I would probably look at here and they do a Turinabol 20. I'd probably only run it at 40 milligrams a day. Dose in the morning, dose in the afternoon. Again, with the growth hormone, my sweet spot, 2.5 IUs. And I'm looking, I think, like Anavar, probably 4, 5, 6 pounds gain. And here's the great thing I think about Turinabol again. I'd probably, of the stacks that we're talking about today, I suspect, along with Anavar, that the muscle that I might gain on this stack would probably be the most that I'd retain because it's that good. And this is something as well that Steve and I mentioned in other shows, just how underrated general PED users consider Turinabol versus the amount of gurus that rate it massively in terms of what they feel is an effective drug that's going to give you exactly what it's supposed to do. So for me, Steve, in terms of cutting, if only because I'll be able to do cardio on it, I would choose Turinabol, run at 40 milligrams a day. What do you think on that? Because we've talked about Turinabol's ability to allow you to do cardio as well, Steve.
How long would you run it at 40 milligrams?
Yeah, there's a thing again. I think it's quite a mild one, and I think I could push it out the 8 weeks quite easily. But again, cutting, for me, the diet, etc., running the growth hormone, like Steve said before, pre-cycle, making sure that my cardio's on point and my diet's on point as I go into the cycle, and then essentially polishing it off with maybe 6 weeks, pushed out to 8 weeks only because I'm trying to cut. And again, it's that thing of me keeping the weight off at the end. I also think because it's relatively speaking, Steve, although there are some side effects, of course, relatively speaking, moderately mild in terms of the side effects overall. For example, I know when we discussed Anadrol right at the beginning, some users get massive water retention on Anadrol. And then obviously you got that particular issue of having to deal with the water, etc. You never hear of massive water retention, for example, or anything like that with Turinabol. So for me, it's one of those mild ones in terms of side effects. However, like Steve said already, you're still looking at using an oral steroid, which still means you're going to have pass-through delivery issues. You still want an organ protector and cycle and so on and so forth. And as mild as it is, you should still treat it thus, because that's just about common sense, Steve, and looking after your body in the long term. But again, I might personally push it out to 8 weeks, but it would all depend on just how tight my diet was, how good my cardio was going in. For example, listeners, I want you, like Steve said, running the growth hormone previously, to have, as we say, all your dice, whatever, in a row, Steve. I want you to be ready. What I don't want you to do is come in and have to take some shortcuts to drop loads of weight and get into shape, etc., etc. So again, that's that approach to training, approach to diet, approach to cardio, and then introducing the growth hormone, and then introducing, for example, in this case, the Serenabol from Para Pharma, so that everything at the end is shining. I want you to get the best results from your cycle, and you get the best results by having everything in place before you introduce the PEDs, and then just getting the absolute fucking best results at the end, Steve. What would be your choice for a cut?
Well, I'm going to talk about a different steroid, but let me say about T-Bol. I love T-Bol. As someone who does a lot of athletic stuff, a lot of endurance stuff, very active lifestyle, I love T-Bol. I love it as a cutting because on T-Bol, it's not going to fuck with your appetite. So you can take the T-Bol, cut your calories, fast. You can do all kinds of stuff on the T-Bol. You're not going to want to prolong fast because you're running the HGH. So that's another thing with HGH. There's no point in running HGH if you're fasting, because when you're fasting at about the 15 hour mark, your HGH starts skyrocketing anyway. So there's no reason to add more exogenous HGH on top of your HGH already going up in your body. So it's kind of pointless to use HGH in that situation. You don't want to do that. So as long as you're fasting, your HGH is going to go up. So, but it works good. Like, let's say you do the OMAD diet. So you do 1 meal a day, or you do alternate day fasting. And then you basically break your fast. You take your HGH, then break your fast. Even on your fasting day, you can take the T-Bol, and it's not going to fuck with it's not going to make you hypoglycemic like other steroids will. It's not going to give you carb cravings like other steroids will. It's not going to make you feel like shit like Superdrol will. Or it's not going to like really force you to eat, spread your carbs out throughout the day, like some of these other harsh steroids will. So in this case, T-Bol is very flexible. So you can definitely use T-Bol to cut, and you have a lot of flexibility with T-Bol. You can still do endurance sports on T-Bol because the pumps on T-Bol aren't that bad like they are in some of these other steroids like Anavar or the next one I'm going to talk about. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can go play tennis for 4 hours. You can go run a 5K. You can go play basketball. You can go kayaking. You can go swimming, all this stuff on T-Bol. You can't do that on some of these other steroids because they're counterproductive to all that. So I got a lot of respect for T-Bol because of the flexibility that it provides you when you're cutting. So it's a great one for cutting, but it's not going to like shred you like magic. Combine it with the HGH, you're going to get good, steady fat loss. If your diet and training are on point, you're going to get good, steady fat loss on that cycle. So that's what it's going to do for you. So I got a lot of respect for T-Bol for sure. For those of you who have that active lifestyle and who want something to complement it and not ruin your cardio. Now, the one I'm talking about is a 180 from that, Winstrol. Now, Winstrol, the pumps are nasty. Okay. So if you take Winstrol and you go running a mile, you're not going to make it a mile. If you're a few days into your Winstrol cycle right off the bat, you're not going to make it because the pumps, your back pumps, your leg pumps, your shin pumps, your calf pumps, going to be nasty on Winstrol. And the Winnie pumps are legendary for that reason. So you're not going to be able to go swimming on Winstrol. It's going to be hard. You're going to be cramping and pumps as you're swimming. You're going to drown on Winstrol. You're not going to be able to go do, a lot of basketball and play a couple hours of tennis or something like that. It's going to be brutal on you. It's going to be brutal. So it's not going to allow you to a lot of activity. You can do high intensity training on Winstrol. Do some sprinting on Winstrol, but you don't want to do long distance running on Winstrol. So it kind of cuts into that. So you lose flexibility on Winstrol. It's not bad when it comes to, giving you carb cravings or giving you appetite or stuff like that. So there is some diet flexibility with Winstrol. You can fast on Winstrol, no problem. But Winstrol dries you out. It's one of the best cutting steroids out there to dry you out. If you want dryness and hardness, it's going to dry the crap out of your body. Okay. Now it's going to shed your head hair a little bit universally. I don't ever met anyone who ran Winstrol who didn't have some head hair loss. All right. So keep that in mind. The side effects are pretty strong, but it will shred you. This Winstrol is almost mandatory. If you're a contest person or a model or you do photo shoots or you're a competitor, pro bodybuilder, physique, whatever, it's going to be mandatory because the guy standing next to you or the other model that you're competing against, they're going to be on Winstrol and you're not. And that's going to give them an advantage. So Winstrol is almost like a mandatory steroid to use in that situation. So anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams of Winstrol a day. And I'm going the conservative route on that. And ParaPharma has a good Winstrol option. 10 milligram a tab, 100 tablets. Now you can go 25 to 50, 20 to 50. Let's go with 20 to 50 since they're 10 milligrams. And you can start at 20 and then play around with that and see how you like it. Go to 30, go to 40, go to 50. So it's a nice thing. That's what I like about the Winstrol from ParaPharma. You can be more flexible. Now you do have a Winstrol 50 Mobster. The Winstrol 50 comes in a 50 milligram tab. So with that one, you can take the one tab a day, or you can split it in half and take 25 milligrams. It's not expensive. If you wanted to go the 25 milligram route, just cut it in half, take half one day, half the next day, and so on. And that would be a good option for you. So they have two different Winstrol options, no matter what your situation is. And look, at the end of the day, Winstrol is a great steroid for cutting. And you can run it with HGH, and it's a really, really good synergy with HGH as well. So look, at the end of the day, it boils down to, final tips and advice. What do we want to do when it comes to anabolic steroids and comes to any of these cycles is going to be diet and training. So you want to make sure that your diet is on point. I don't care if you're bulking, recomping, or cutting. Always eat clean. Always eat clean. And stick to your good carbs, your good fats, your good proteins. Okay. And I'll give you an example. People always ask this question, Steve, what do you mean by a bad protein? Sausage, bacon, smoked meats that are full of refined oils and refined preservatives, cold cuts. Again, they're processed, they're refined, they add preservatives to them. It's all about making money, right? So when you go to the grocery store and they slice your cold cuts for you, the cold cut's sitting there, they got to sell it. It may take 4 days for them to sell those cold cuts, 5 days. It's going to go bad if they don't add preservatives to it, right? And the preservatives they add, it's not salt. Adding salt is fine. That's not nothing wrong with that as a preservative, but they don't add salt. They add nitrates, they add other crap. Same thing with sausages, same thing with bacon. These are processed meats that are designed to sit on the shelf for long periods of time and be sold without going bad. And look, at the end of the day, that's fine. Some people have to go down that route, whether for economic reasons or whatever, and that's their business. But we want to put the best stuff in our body. So when it comes to proteins, the best proteins are going to be your grass-fed beefs, your hormone-free poultry, your bone broth, homemade bone broth, okay, that you make yourself, that you know what's in it. Those are going to be your best options when it comes to your proteins. And then animal organs, which is not easy to find for a lot of you. So look, if you can't find animal organs, then you got to skip the animal organs. You go to the grocery store and you ask them for animal organs, they're going to be like, well, this guy must be going fishing, for catfish or something in some pond, because that's what people buy, liver, in America. That's what they do. But look, organs are a delicacy all over the world. I mean, but we treat it like it's nothing. But look, if you can't get animal organs, it's fine. Go with the bone broth. I do homemade bone broth all the time, especially during the colder months. And if I lived in your climate, Mobster, I would be doing bone broth all the time, because this stuff is full of not only good quality proteins, but also good quality collagen and fats. It's very, very, very fatty, very fatty. And those good fats are something we just don't get in our American diets. So good fats, that covers your good fats too, the bone broth. You hit it. And the vitamins and minerals and all the nutrition that you get from it, you won't beat it. And then add some like spinach and you can add some Swiss chard, any greens that you like. I like to add the baby spinach to it. I like to add some potatoes. You can add some sweet potatoes or regular potatoes to it. Makes a really, really good meal. It's delicious. In fact, right now I'm fasting for a week. When I break my fast, I'm gonna have the first day I break my fast, I'm gonna have some fruit, but then the second day, I'm gonna have that bone broth. That's gonna be the next thing I break my fast with. Now, bone broth is fantastic for those of you who are incorporating fasting into this lifestyle and into these diets. The recomping and the cutting, especially, you can do the bone broth, and that would be the best thing you can put in your body. It's the healthiest thing you're gonna put on your body, guys. Fruits and vegetables and bone broth. Those are the 3 healthy things you can put in your body, and that are going to make your body into a machine. Okay. And that's going to be the most optimal thing. So that's my tip and trick for you guys on this, Mobster. Any tips and final advice you want to give? You want to talk about the synergy and steroids again?
I tell you what I'm going to do, Steve. I'm going to echo the thoughts you've just given, and I'm going to quote Mr. Olympian. I've quoted this particular turn of phrase before. So Dexter Jackson, aka the Blade, talks about how he had to eat clean, eat tidy, as we say here in Wales, in order to get the best results. He said, I've got amazing genetics, Steve, for being in shape. I always have. And yet, in order for me to be my absolute best, to get the best results, and I'm paraphrasing here when I'm talking about Para Pharma and specifically as a performance enhancing drugs, but for him to get the best results from training, and one assumes from PED use, he had to eat clean. He had to eat tidy, as we say, meaning you can get a certain distance, a certain positive results from using the solid products from Para Pharma, but the fucking best results are going to come from brutally hard workouts, from properly done cardio and conditioning work, and from properly eaten solid nutrition, exactly the kind that Steve just recommended. Fresh, wholesome, organic. I love organ meat, Steve. I said we can't get enough of it over here. I've just recently had a whole one evening meal consisted pretty much of some liver and vegetables, as you said. I can't get, for some particular reason, kidneys, and I love kidneys. And a good old-fashioned British steak and kidney pie would fill me right up, especially for the winter, as Steve said. We can't get enough of those things. You will get so far, guys, but you will get another level of results, positive results, your best results, if you followed solid training. The brief and brutal stuff is actually a great growth hormone booster, naturally. The results from training have been positive, but when your nutrition and your cardio is there as well, guys, that's absolutely where you want to be and to get the best results. And that's what we want for you guys when we do this podcast and give you advice. Use ParaPharma products, solid training, solid nutrition, keep those dosages where we've suggested, and you should get the absolute best results you possibly can. Please note, we are not doctors and opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.